What's up, guys? I thought I would take a minute here and go through these biological molecules that we're talking about, these big macromolecules that deal with living things. Um, so let's go through that. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, here's three main ideas that you should get out of this. What is the role of carbon in living organisms? What are the four major families of biological molecules or biological macromolecules? And what are the functions of each group of biological macromolecules? That's kind of the most important part of this whole section that we're going over right now, those four major macromolecules. First, let's look at a few basic things. When we're talking about the macromolecules that deal with the molecules in our body, we're talking about organic chemistry. And organic chemistry is the study of organic compounds, which are compounds that contain carbon, but more importantly, it's the stuff that makes up living things. Carbon is a component of almost all biological molecules. Carbon atoms bond together to form a variety of different compounds, and that's those macromolecules we're going to talk about in a second. And the word macromolecule, what that means is just it's a large molecule formed when you join a bunch of little molecules together. Another important word here is polymer. Polymers are molecules made from repeating units of identical or very nearly identical compounds called monomers. So many monomers make a polymer. And then the four important categories of macromolecules that you're going to need to know are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So let's break down what each of those look like for you to understand the difference here. The first one is carbohydrates. You can see some pretty decent pictures here that show a glucose or a sucrose or a glycogen. These are different carbohydrates. You're going to see that a compound composed of a ratio with one carbon to two hydrogens to one oxygen is going to be a carbohydrate. And again, that comes out of the ratio of those different elements together, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, or 1 to 2 to 1. The general formula for a carbohydrate is CH2O times N, and N indicates the number of CH2O units in the chain. So the bigger the polymer, the bigger this little letter N, which represents that number, is going to be. And carbohydrates are a central source of energy for organisms, as well as functioning for cellular support in some plants and fungi and animals. But that's what carbs are. Let's look at lipids. Lipids are molecules made of mostly carbon and hydrogen, and they make up things like fats and oils and waxes. The main function of a lipid is to store energy, but they can also be used to prevent water loss in plants, or they form honeycombs in a beehive. And the reason is, if you look at this makeup here, how it's made up, it has a polar phosphate head and a non-polar fatty acid tails. And the way they line up together, it's either going to trap or keep out water. So they help prevent water loss in plants, and it's because of the way they're made up here. The next one is going to be proteins. Proteins are compounds made of smaller carbon compounds called amino acids. And then amino acids are things that are made of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen, sometimes sulfur, and they all have that same general structure. You can see over here, they have an amino group, a hydrogen atom, a carboxyl group, and then a variable area that it can be different based on what kind of amino acid it is. So again, that's what proteins are going to look like. There's 20 different amino acids, and proteins are made up of all the various combinations of these 20 amino acids. So if you have 20 different ones, think of all the different combinations that those 20 things could come up with, and that's how proteins are formed. And proteins are also responsible for structural support in cells, transporting substances within and between cells, signaling within and between cells, speeding up chemical reactions, and controlling cell growth. So proteins have a lot of important functions inside of living organisms. And then finally, we have the nucleic acids. you're probably more familiar with this word than you think you are. We'll get into that in a second. But nucleic acids are complex macromolecules that transmit and store genetic information. Nucleic acids are composed of smaller repeating subunits composed of carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and hydrogen. And we call those repeating subunits nucleotides. And if you look at these pictures here, you can see a nucleotide has a sugar, a nitrogen base, and a phosphate group. And that repeats over and over and over to make a nucleic acid. So you have sugar base, phosphate group, sugar base, phosphate group, and so on and so on. That's what makes up a nucleic acid, these different nucleotides. And there are two types of nucleic acids in living things: deoxyribonucleic acid and ribonucleic acid, or the words you are more familiar with, most likely DNA and RNA. So these are the things that make up our genetic information. These are very, very important. We'll get into a whole unit about DNA and genetic information soon, but this is just to give you an idea what nucleic acids are and what their role is in a living organism. And that ends that portion of these notes. I also want to share with you guys the PDF that I've attached on Google Classroom. It's of your textbook. The scan looks a little misshapen, but it's a better quality than the previous one. You can actually read it. It's not blurry. But if you go to the second page here, it shows you pictures and functions of each of the carbohydrates. And this page, as well as, your own Google searches and everything, but this page is going to be very helpful for working on that Macromolecules Scrapbook project that is due on Sunday. So find this PDF. It's in the textbook resources portion of Google Classroom, and this will greatly help you with your scrapbook project. And as well as this video, I would watch this video and rewind it as many times as you need to. But yeah, refer to this document. And again, the text goes into what each of those things mean, what their structure looks like, what their functions are. And speaking of the project, let's talk about what that looks like for a second. All right, here is the information on your molecules project that I was talking about. So you have pretty much the whole week until Sunday to get this in, which is plenty of time. It's not that long of an assignment. But what you're going to do is you're going to take this Google Slides document right here. You're going to click on it, and you'll notice there are enough pages in this document already, so you don't have to add any pages. You can if you need to spill over some information, but it already has like preset the amount you need. So again, you can add to it, just don't take away from it. You're going to make a cover page with your name. You're going to make a table of contents page. Make sure to include all your pages in that page. You're going to make a different page for each macromolecule. So a page for carbohydrates, a page for lipids, a page for proteins, and a page for nucleic acids. And then on each of those pages, you're going to include the name of the biomolecule you're talking about. You're going to define it. You're going to tell me its function or multiple functions. And then you're going to do a Google search to find some pictures that illustrate this particular molecule. And then there's some questions you're going to briefly answer on each page. Like number one, what's the purpose and function? We've kind of already said that. So how does it serve living organisms? What's the point? We've kind of already addressed that. How does our body use them, if that makes it simpler to think about? If it has more than one function, make sure you include both a picture of that function as well as an explanation of that function. Also, you're going to give some examples of these objects in everyday life that contain these biomolecules. An easy one to think of is nucleic acid. A picture of DNA would be perfect for that, because DNA is how we use it. It's in our DNA. So what do these molecules look like? Find a Google image of the chemical structure. It could be anything, literally any image of it. You're going to label the pictures. And when I say label it, I don't mean like label every single little part. I just mean tell me if this is a lipid, make sure you tell me it's a lipid. If it's a carbohydrate, make sure you tell me it's a carbohydrate. Um, and then each page is going to need a number. And I want you to be creative. Don't just throw some stuff in there. You can use whatever fonts you want, whatever colors you want. Um, you can pick how your images and words are laid out. That's completely up to you. And that's what I mean when I say be creative. Change the theme, change the colors. Again, just kind of make it look cool. And that's up to you how you do that. And again, that's due Sunday night. And that's really a good explanation of all the macromolecules and then an explanation of how you should work on this project. So that's it for this week. If anyone has any questions, as usual, send me an email. I will help you as best as I can, answer all your questions. And yeah, best of luck. Do a good job. Let me know if you need help.